I forgot to push the record button. Wah, 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 wah. Well, I just talked for the last 10 minutes and nobody heard anything, so super start to this week's video. Welcome to week 7, where it's now 10:25 instead of 10:15, where I was originally planning to start. I have a lovely Oktoberfest since Aaron made fun of my Busch Light from last week, Oktoberfest from Carbon 4, and I have a sleeping floof instead of the butt liquor from last week. So let's try this take 2. All right, week 7's top score and biggest blowout of the week. Jason's You Suck McBain doing exactly what I predicted and beating the snot out of My Car Smells Like the Pits. 174.8 to 101.9. Jason was led in scoring by the number 1 wide receiver this week, Jamar Chase, who promptly crushed my team after I tried to trade for him this week. I guess Chase was not thrilled about trying to get traded to my team. His 36 points were followed by 28.6 from Aaron Jones, 21.8 from George Kittle, 19.6 from DJ Moore, and 18.7 from Trevor Lawrence. This was Jason's first high score this season, and interesting enough, through 7 weeks of the season, we've had 7 different owners take down the top scoring prize. Any given Sunday proving to be quite true this season. For me, I got 20.5 points from Saquon Barkley, 15.8 from Travis Kelce, and 14.3 from T. Higgins. Also got a couple other double-digit games from Derek Carr and Tony Pollard. I could have picked up another 17 points by benching Damian Harris in favor of Deontay Foreman, but the extra 17 points really mattered not in the final score. I was pissed as I managed to only get a single touchdown for my entire roster, bench included. 1 passing touchdown from Derek Carr. I thought that was just awful, and I was pretty happy to have at least broken 100 with just that 1 touchdown.
It could be worse, right? Much, much worse.
Speaking of worse, Week 7's closest game was between the 2 lowest scoring teams this week, with Pope 1.0's Serenity Now knocking off Tom's Gotta Waddle After That Deuce, 88.2 to 81.7, a 6.5 point margin of victory. This matchup featured the only team that scored 0 touchdowns this week, as Tom tied the all-time record for least amount of touchdowns by a team during an individual week. Congrats. Applause for you. And it wasn't just your starters, but there was a big old nothing burger from your bench as well. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat with that, as your bench this week featured 4 bye players and a suspended Calvin Ridley.
Exactly what I expected would happen.
Pope 1.0 was led by 18.3 from Terry McLaurin and a pair of 15-point games from Tua and Chuba Hubbard. You did have an off week from Mark Andrews, who scored just 0.4 of a point, and James Robinson, who scored 0. Hopefully he has better luck in New York. My, how the times have changed. You were pretty happy, actually, after a player that you had got traded to the Jets. When was the last time that happened mid-season? Well, if you guessed 2014 and Vikings legend Percy Harvin, you'd be correct. As one might expect with being a Percy Harvin, he was mostly terrible with the Jets. And to be fair, he was mostly terrible with the Seahawks and the Vikings before that. Other than somehow his rookie year when he actually managed to win Rookie of the Year. The NFL has certainly changed in the last 13 years. When you look at the candidates for Rookie of the Year that year and the numbers they put up, it's crazy. Sorry, that's why I went kind of down a bit of a rabbit hole there. The Jets may never be this fantasy relevant again. That's kind of the rabbit hole I got down, which is why it's 10:30 at night and I'm just recording this. Tom got 15.7 from Dameon Pierce, 13.5 from the Raiders defense, 12.8 from Greg Zuerlein and Jalen Waddle. You were hurt in this one, opting to start Romeo Doubs, who put up a 0 in Green Bay's offense. And Daniel Bellinger only had a single catch for 13 yards before getting poked in the eye and fracturing his eye socket. Ow. Trent's Joe Burr, oh yeah, Kool-Aid Man, knocked off CMC's returns, 153.1 to 99. This matchup featured the highest scoring QB and the highest scoring running back this week. Trent was led by top overall scorer of Joe Burrow with a 42.2 point game, doubling up with Tyler Boyd getting his best game of the season with 32.5 points. Besides those 2 guys, you got 16.6 from Kansas City's defense, 15.5 from Jonathan Taylor, 14.2 from Tyreek Hill, and a pair of 10-point games from Brian Robinson Jr. and Taysom Hill. You could have pulled down the top score this week by getting both bench running backs of Eno Benjamin and Gus the Bus Edwards in for A.J. Dillon and Robinson. But a solid week nonetheless, moving you up to 9th place in the standings after the big score and the win. For Drew, well, it was a one-man show this week. Josh Jacobs dropped the highest scoring running back game with 39.5 points, so thumbs up for that. The thumbs down part was that was about 40% of your total score. You got 11.5 points from Allen Lazard and then a couple of 8 and 9-point games. CMC should bounce back in that San Francisco offense, but I'm going to be worried that he's going to end up scoring less touchdowns since he's not a one-man team anymore. Kittle, Debo, Brandon Ayuk, they're all likely to get their touchdowns. Speaking of CMC, I was thinking that he was on his last contract year, so you ended up timing that contract pretty well if he does end up underperforming in San Francisco, which means that we might finally see a new team name format for you next year. Exciting. Or maybe this year if you decide to trade him. On the topic of trades, as a general reminder, the trade deadline is coming up in about 3.5 weeks. There are several players who are free agents this year who might make good trade bait if you're thinking about selling and stockpiling for next year. Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams, Nick Chubb, CMC, George Kittle, David Montgomery, and Kyler Murray are all players who cannot be kept next year if you're looking for trade value.
Let's make a deal.
I've literally put out like 10 trade offers.
Sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be shit.
Can't blame the guy for trying. All right, this is how far I made it before I realized the camera light wasn't on, and we have. Okay, so I've got to continue from here. So, time for a beer. All right. Brandon's blown call took down Chris's 2 men into defense, 113.8 to 105.4. Brandon was led by Patrick Mahomes with 29.9, 18.7 from Nick Chubb, 17.1 from Christian Kirk, and 16.6 from Jerry Jeudy. You did have the lowest score of any running back in a starting spot this week, as J.D. McKissick managed just 4 yards against Green Bay. Also not helping much was Keenan Allen, who had just 3.1 points on a play count cap since he was limited in his first game back from injury. Either Curtis Samuel or Zay Jones would have been a better option over Allen. Chris was led by a massive game from Daniel Jones, getting 31.8 points in to lead the squad, finally figuring out a solution at quarterback, maybe?
I fucking hope so.
After that, you got 17.5 from Alvin Kamara, 11 from Najee Harris, and 14.1 from Justin Tucker. Kyle Pitts continues to struggle for you at tight end, putting up just 3.9 this week. And Tyquan Thornton, never heard that name until I looked at him while he was in your lineup tonight, who's the number 3 wide receiver for New England, who added just 3.9 points. With the 2 low-scoring starters, you really had no one to get in for them, unfortunately, as you just had 0.4 of a point on your bench. Now, that wasn't the lowest-scoring bench, but it was the lowest-scoring bench that actually had people playing this week. You got 4 yards from Dontrell Hillis backing up Derrick Henry. Derrick identifies as whiny bitches, complained to the managers of fantasy gods long enough to get the win over Lee's unsolicited DAC picks, 138.6 to 111.4. Now, truthfully, Derrick actually had a huge week from the top of his team. The top 6 scorers put up at least 15 points or more, led by 31.8 from Kenneth Walker, 23.8 from Ramondre Stevenson, 21.6 from Mike Williams, and 20.3 from D-Hop. Despite the win, it's a little bit of a rough week for you on injuries, as Mike Williams sprained an ankle to go out 4 weeks, and DK Metcalf tweaked his knee and is questionable this week. Also, you had the lowest scoring defense this week, getting just 2.3 points from San Francisco against the Kansas City Chiefs. Opted to start a defense versus one of the 2 or 3 actual teams that are having a pulse this year in the league. It's a bold choice.
Dumb bitches like dumb things.
Lee, despite the loss, put up a very respectable 111 points, led by 22 points from Raheem Mostert, 2 17-point games from Devontae Adams and Ezekiel Elliott, 15.2 from Brandon Ayuk, and 12.3 from Dak Prescott in his return from injury. It was a pretty quiet game from him, as he didn't need to do too much to beat the Lions. They pretty much relied on the running game. You crushed Derek in terms of bench points, putting up 54 to his 15, but despite all those points, you didn't have any single player that you could have swapped out to close the 27-point gap in the loss. Aaron's picking so bad it hurts. Each passed Pope 2.0's Holy Trinity, 98.6 to 89.6. Aaron was led by 17.6 from Chris Olave, 16.3 from Jimmy G, 14.1 from MVS, and 3 other players who put up double digits. You got the win this week despite not breaking 100. You had several solid games, but just no massive home run, top players at their position kind of weeks. The best game you had on the roster was George Pickens with 18.1 points on your bench. For Pope 2.0, you were led by the Herberts of the world with 18.1 from Justin and 17.6 from Khalil. You also got 11 from Will Lutz and 12.9 from the Baltimore defense. You could have gotten Hayden Hurst in with some roster swaps to get about another 6 points, but you still would have come up short versus Aaron. This matchup, unfortunately, did feature each team starting a guy who ended up in IR after the game got over with.
And we're both screwed.
No. Okay.
I have to think that Aaron's Breece Hall is a bigger loss at this point than Pope 2.0's Mike Boone. However, Pope 2.0 has probably the better depth to handle that loss because I think Mike Boone was a fill-in just for this week with Miles Sanders and Devin Singletary on bye to slot in. Aaron probably has the better player coming off of IR to go out, which is DeAndre Swift, but is looking pretty weak at other running backs besides that spot. And finally, Alex's Big Al Sr. ruined Nick's best game of the season, beating Tebow Hannes 152.1 to 121.1. Alex had a huge game from Austin Eckler with 36.7, 23.3 from Dallas, 21.9 from Travis Etienne Jr., and 19.8 from Derrick Henry. Oh, and 17 from Jason Myers. Heck of a solid top of the lineup, which led to the 150-point day. Unfortunately, the Detroit high-powered offense from earlier in the season appears to be no more, as the Lions kind of got smacked around by Dallas, 24-6. Nick was led by 25.4 from Juju Smith-Schuster, a pair of 18-point games from Mike Evans and Joe Mixon, double-digit games from Aaron Rodgers, David Montgomery, and David Njoku. You could have snagged a couple extra points by getting Hines and lineup, but in what was your best week of the season so far, you were unable to keep pace with Alex. First week in which you actually scored over the average for all teams this week, which came in at around 116 this week. You did have the lowest scoring kicker this week, as Nick Foles scored just 2 PATs, 2 points, in the blowout loss to the Bears. Belichick is probably thinking to himself, the Bears?
I don't know, Chicago fucking Bears.
Now, normally this is where I would do an update on the fabs and the pickups, but there really wasn't anything notable this week. Everybody just pretty much got a guy with some bid versus somebody else who had a $0 bid. And here's where I normally do an update on wagers as well, but there really wasn't anything new this week, and I could just do an update on our big loser bet, but that has to go the whole season anyways. It's been an off-topic night. I'm getting this recorded and edited and getting it out there, so that will be it. I will see you all next week for Week 8 recap, which we're going to try to do before midnight. So